as we learn more about the atrocities committed by the Hamas terrorists. Could Israel also be preparing for another fight against Hezbollah? We'll bring you a look at that major question as well. Possible U.S. aid for Israel tied up on Capitol Hill as Republicans still have not decided on a new Speaker of the House. And a disturbing trend in Europe, growing violence against Christian landmarks. Those stories and more today on Newswatch.
This is CBN Newswatch.
We begin in Israel, where 3 days after the horror of the invasion by Hamas, Israelis are mobilizing for an all-out assault on the terror enclave in Gaza. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, more revelations are coming to light of the atrocities committed by the Hamas terrorists.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on national TV to address the country.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it. Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions.
Israeli forces report 1,500 Hamas terrorists killed in Israel. Netanyahu expressed horror at the barbarity of Hamas.
The savage attacks that Hamas perpetrated against innocent Israelis are mind-boggling, slaughtering families in their homes, massacring hundreds of young people at an outdoor festival, kidnapping scores of women, children, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. Hamas terrorists bound, burned, and executed children. They are savages. Hamas is ISIS.
I don't think since the Holocaust we have experienced such a massacre. Those images of children and women and bodies being paraded in the streets of Gaza, being spat on and bitten, is absolutely horrifying to think that our babies are there in the streets as hostages.
The fate of up to 150 hostages, including Americans, now held in Gaza, hangs in the balance.
They were taken from their home, from their beds.
An Israeli mother who asked not to be named is pleading for the return of her sons, ages 12 and 16.
I want my children back home. I want them to fight each other. I want them to annoy each other. I want them to get on my nerves again. I want them back. I want them to be back sleeping in their beds.
Hamas warned they will start executing hostages one by one unless Israel stops bombing Gaza without advance notice. Member of Knesset Sharon Haskell says Israel is really at war with Iran, the power behind Hamas.
Chris, I'm sure you will remember this as some of the first days of the war between Israel and Iran. Because you can say anything you want about Hamas, but you know it's Iran who is standing behind this vicious attack. Financially, on the ground, physically. In some of these videos, you can hear people speaking in Farsi.
Middle East expert Dan Diker sees the attack as part of Iran's Middle East chessboard.
It is clear that the Iranian regime, the IRGC, is moving these chess pieces around according to their interest in trying to reach the uranium enrichment finish line of 90% weapons-grade uranium.
In the meantime, the IDF has called up 300,000 reservists to prepare for what many expect is a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. On Israel's northern border, several skirmishes between Iranian-backed Hezbollah and Israeli forces lead many to believe a second front could be a real possibility.
And Chris Mitchell joins us now with more from Jerusalem. Chris, is it possible the war could expand with fighting against Hezbollah in the north as well as Hamas in the south?
It's very possible, Mark. In fact, in the last couple of days, there's been skirmishes along the border. There's been, I believe, 3 Israeli soldiers that have been killed. A couple of Hamas operatives have been killed as well. And the IDF has actually been striking some of the observation towers that Hezbollah has set up along the border. And at one time, the IDF has ordered people along the border fence there with Lebanon to go into their bomb shelters. I think that order's been lifted right now. But the same thing that has happened in the south is exactly the same kind of war scenario that Hezbollah expects or has prepared for in the north, using tunnels to infiltrate into northern communities, to kill, to kidnap. But the IDF, as I've been told, and just also heard in the last just few minutes, they are getting up there on the border, and they're prepared for any eventuality.
Chris, you mentioned a possible Israeli ground invasion into Gaza. What would that look like, and when do you think that would happen?
Well, it could happen very soon, Mark. In fact, just to update one of those numbers in our report, 360,000 reservists have been called up. I expect any sort of incursion into Hamas to be massive and with the goal, apparently, to topple Hamas and really destroy this terror group on Israel's southern border. As we've said for years, Israel has sort of had a policy of containing Hamas, but not defeating Hamas. After this massacre of up to maybe 1,000 Israelis and almost 3,000 injured and 150 or more hostages, that policy is no longer in effect. And I think any sort of invasion, Mark, is going to be massive.
Chris, let's talk more about the hostages. The pictures that we're seeing are absolutely horrific. Men, women, and children, infants. How is Israel going to deal with Hamas threats against them?
That's probably one of the biggest conundrums that the Israeli military and political echelon have to deal with. As Hamas has stated, they're going to use them as bargaining chips. They may execute them one by one if Israel doesn't warn them of any aerial strikes. Now, what happens on a ground invasion remains to be seen. So Israel's leadership has two competing efforts here: to get the hostages out of harm's way, to return them to their families. On the other hand, to try to destroy Hamas as a fighting organization on its southern border. That's going to be the biggest question, I think. And it's just heart-wrenching to see from babies to elderly, maybe Holocaust survivors, in harm's way, perhaps in tunnels or secret places all over Gaza. That's going to be the really thorniest issue, I think, facing Israel right now.
Chris, the Israeli government has been split in recent months. Is it unified now during this time of war?
You know, I asked that question of Sharon Haskell. She's a member of Knesset and a member of the National Unity Party. She's in the opposition. She hopes that that's going to happen. I had heard yesterday it might happen last night. It still hasn't happened yet. There's probably still issues remaining of why the opposition wants to come in or hasn't come in yet. But I would say that, as Sharon has explained to me, in terms of Israelis, I think right now there's a groundswell of unity enforcing, being unified against this enemy on its border that has done something, as she said, probably the worst thing since the Holocaust. So in terms of Israelis, I think they're unified. I think the government has yet to be unified. We'll see if it happens within the next day or a few days.
The Saudis have talked about the need for a Palestinian state. Where will that stand after the Hamas attack?
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon now, Mark. You know, now that Hamas has done what it's done. And, you know, Fatah, which is the political party of the Palestinian Authority, has really praised some of this. You know, if you go to a website like Palestinian Media Watch, you're going to find almost on a daily basis, you know, Fatah, which is, like I said, the political arm of the Palestinian Authority, praising terrorists, praising and encouraging terrorism. So I think a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, is much further off 72 hours after this invasion by Hamas.
All right, our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reporting from Jerusalem. Thanks as always, Chris. Stay safe. Here at home, President Biden set to address the nation at 1 o'clock this afternoon. At least 11 Americans died in the attack, and the number held hostage is unknown. The president met with his national security team, ordering them to coordinate with Israel on all aspects of the crisis. He also issued a statement along with the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Germany, pledging, quote, our steadfast and united support for the state of Israel and our unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and its appalling acts of terrorism. And last night, the White House lit in the blue and white colors of the Israeli flag in a show of sympathy for the victims and support for the Jewish state. Despite the president's show of support for Israel, many critics argue his policies have helped Iran financially by failing to enforce the sanctions on Iranian oil, giving them more income to finance Hamas. Coming up, potential aid to Israel, along with passage of a resolution showing support for the Jewish state and condemnation of the terror group Hamas, are on hold on Capitol Hill. That's until congressional Republicans can decide on a new House Speaker. So far, no progress. We're going to have that story when we come back. In Washington, the House of Representatives returning to session today, where business, including possible aid for Israel, is at a standstill after a small band of Republicans joined Democrats to oust Speaker Kevin McCarthy last week. CBN Washington correspondent Hillary Powell breaks down what's next, since the House is essentially shut down until a new speaker is selected.
Monday night, Republicans ended an angry meeting with no agreement on who will become their next speaker. Earlier in the day, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy said he won't rule out a return to the speakership.
Unfortunately, the House can do nothing without a speaker. That's a decision by the conference. I'll allow the conference to make whatever decision. Whether I'm speaker or not, I'm a member of this body. I know what history has had, and I can lead in any position it is.
On hold is potential aid to Israel, along with a passage of a resolution showing support for the Jewish state and condemnation of the terror group Hamas. Congress also needs to fund the U.S. government by November 17th or risk a shutdown. Experts say it's unclear if McCarthy could make a comeback.
I'm not sure that the math has changed. The urgency has changed because it's very unclear what powers the interim speaker, Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, has, whether their significant legislation can even be brought to the floor.
Republicans officially seeking the gavel include Louisiana Representative Steve Scalise and Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio. Neither Scalise, the majority leader, who is the second-ranking Republican in the House, nor Jordan, who is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, backed by Donald Trump, appears to have the votes needed to win. Members are expressing frustration that the crisis shows weakness to countries like China and Russia.
What kind of message are we sending to our adversaries when we can't govern, when we're dysfunctional? when we don't even have a Speaker of the House.
Hillary Powell, CBN News, Washington.
With a slim majority, Republicans are considering how to quickly elect a speaker, including requiring the candidate to reach the 218-vote majority behind closed doors before a public vote on the House floor. Still ahead, the increasing attacks against Christian landmarks in Europe. We're going to bring you a look at this dangerous trend right after this. Violence against Christian landmarks is getting worse in Europe. CBN's Chuck Holton delves into a disturbing trend unfolding in France and beyond.
In late June, rioters targeted an evangelical church in Marseille, leaving behind a chilling message: Muhammad is the last prophet. A week later, a Catholic bookstore in Nantes fell victim to another attack. Reports indicate that such violent incidents against Christians are on the rise.
And in France, it's even worse than what you read online, is because on average, we have 3 hate crimes against Christian buildings or churches every day. It's a very high number, and Christians are the most persecuted group when it comes to hate crimes in France.
The Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe has recorded hundreds of incidents, including churches set ablaze and vandalized in France. Meanwhile, the European Center for Law and Justice highlights the escalating threats toward individuals, particularly those converting from Islam. Even with these disturbing numbers, law enforcement often remains passive.
This shows you the level of lawlessness that is going on in our countries, where people can basically rob, assault, harass, steal, and so on, do really violent actions without fearing really any consequences.
As a Christian in England, it becomes very difficult to engage with people who are Muslim. So gospel is very offensive, especially telling Muslim people that God have a son and his son came and died for us can be very offensive.
For Hatun Tash, a former Muslim who embraced Christianity a decade ago, her newfound faith has ignited severe backlash in England.
You can get punched, you can get hospitalized because they get upset and they beat you, they break into your houses.
Her conversion came at a heavy price. Tosh faced a violent attack in 2021 while engaging with Muslims in London. Undeterred by her injuries, Tosh continued her mission.
Oh, Jesus doesn't need me. Allah is in need of you for to be God.
Across Europe, hostility against Christians seems to be the new norm. This could account for the dwindling number of churches in France in recent times. More than 4 years after the Notre Dame Cathedral was destroyed by fire in 2019, they still don't know exactly what caused it, but officials say it probably wasn't arson. That's not the case for the hundreds of churches that have been attacked across France. And the real question is, what are the French willing to do to protect their religious and cultural heritage as more and more of these churches get vandalized and even destroyed?
It's not just Muslims, by far not. Our data does not support that as of now. But we also have Satanists, we have radical left groups. There's a lot of vandalism coming from that side as well, especially when it is about the church's reaction to any abortion or LGBT topic.
Despite the consensus among experts about this rising intolerance, media and governmental agencies seem hesitant to address this as a pressing concern.
They have to hide that they left Islam, that they are Christian, or that they don't believe. But if they claim publicly that they are Christian, they face real retaliation, not only from their families, but also from the Islamic community.
France made secularism law in 1905, even though the majority at the time still identified as Christians. Today, many believers notice an increasing hostility toward their faith, echoing the Bible's warnings.
Bible doesn't tell us you are going to have comfortable life. But Jesus says, because of me, you will be persecuted. You will be in troubles, but I have overcome it. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Always rejoice. But not because I have a place I can put my feet on. No, because I have a God who loved me enough to give himself for me.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Paris.
Pray for Christians around the world. Well, coming up, some good news from here in the U.S. How Habitat for Humanity is building new homes for those in need and handing the new homeowners their keys and a Bible. We're going to bring you that story when we come back. Stay with us.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel Live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
Former President Jimmy Carter celebrated his 99th birthday last week. In his honor, volunteers took part in Habitat for Humanity's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter Work Project. Over the years, the project has built, renovated, and repaired thousands of homes in 14 countries. CBN's Abigail Robertson reports from North Carolina, where the tradition continues.
For 35 years, the Carters have donated a week of their time each year to building safe and affordable homes as part of the Carter Work Project. Since this is the first year they haven't been on site, country music superstars Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood are taking the reins. They're here in Charlotte, leading nearly 3,000 volunteers in building 27 new homes.
Seeing the families and knowing from doing this before how happy they are now and how much happier they're going to be once they get into that house. I think that's what it is for me. That's the thing that I love the most.
The country music power couple has volunteered with Habitat for Humanity alongside the Carters for more than a decade.
But the truth is, great leaders, whether they're there or not, are there. The Carters are here. Chip and Becky, their boy and his wife are here. They work harder than anybody else, but they stay in the background. Just there's that humility again in service. That's it. So there's your light. Just follow it.
This year, Garth and Trisha get the honor of handing the new homeowners their keys and a Bible, a long-standing tradition at Habitat for Humanity.
If you've got that Bible, you've always got that foundation, you can start over. If you're at rock bottom, there's the Bible. If you're on top, there's the Bible. I think it's as much of a foundation as the floor you're standing on in your house.
With faith at their core, volunteers begin each day with a morning devotional and along the way write scripture and encouraging messages on homes as they build them.
I hope that they know that every nail that has been driven, every board that has been placed has been done so with love.
While the organization has built homes since 1976, CEO Jonathan Reckford credits the Carters for turning the once small operation into what it is today.
The world found out about Habitat in 1984 when President Carter and Mrs. Carter rode a bus out from Plains, Georgia to New York City and spent a week sleeping in a church basement and rehabbing a tenement building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And no one had ever seen a former president of the United States behaving this way.
In order to qualify for a Habitat for Humanity home, homeowners must volunteer for almost 300 hours, plus take classes on financial management and home maintenance. As part of the home purchasing process, Habitat works with the buyer to ensure the mortgage allows the family to spend no more than 30% of their income on housing.
That's one of the reasons that Habitat homeowners have been incredibly successful, even though they are lower income than most other homeowners.
For future homeowners like Brianna Sanford, Habitat for Humanity is a dream come true.
I couldn't have done it without God. I'm telling you, God is awesome.
Sanford helped design her new home that she'll soon share with her 2 kids.
So I'll be able to live more comfortable, be able to take my kids and do more, take them out of town, different places that we've never been before. It's just going to be a break.
While many first-time homeowners like Brianna will receive their keys this week, Habitat for Humanity volunteers will continue working at this site until 39 homes in the community are completed. Reporting from Charlotte, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
That's a great story, and glad they hand out a Bible as well. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or you can talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.
Israel is at war. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. A surprise attack over the weekend, now being called Israel's 9/11. Hamas terrorists invaded Israel's border by land, air, and sea, murdering at least 900 people and kidnapping over 100, now holding them hostage inside Gaza. CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burt joins us now. Caitlin, we know Israel has officially declared war on Hamas. How do the hostages complicate what happens next?
Jenna, those taken captive include men, women, children, the elderly. And Hamas plans to use the hostages to negotiate for Palestinian prisoners. But they're now saying they'll be killing one hostage anytime Israel hits a civilian area without warning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised to destroy Hamas. And with a military ground invasion of Gaza expected any time now, it's a race against time to get those hostages back.
There'll probably be a military operation, and then there'll be a special operations mission that will go in and look for hostages. But it's going to be very difficult considering what they're doing in terms of growing the military force, what they've said they've committed to in terms of Gaza, and the kind of language that Netanyahu has been using is going to make it very difficult to get all of those hostages home.
Up to 300,000 Israeli reservists have now been called up to active duty ahead of the expected counteroffensive. It's the largest and quickest call-up in Israeli history, with Netanyahu warning this could be a long and difficult war.
Right now, I think it's going to be a combination of surgical strikes and a ground invasion in there. I think that's really the only way to take the land and to destroy Hamas and its infrastructure. They're going to go in and do what they can to rescue these hostages, but I think that they're willing to go in, even at the risk of some of these hostages, just to, for once and for all, come against this terror threat on its southern border.
There's also major concern the threat won't remain limited to Israel's southern border. Monday, Iran-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon say they fired missiles and artillery into Israel. The IDF responding with an assault of its own. Skirmishes there raising questions over whether not only Hezbollah, but also Iran may make this a three-front war.
This is unprecedented to see the kind of cooperation between IRGC, Quds Force, Hamas, and even Hezbollah. So it is possible you would think that that would meet the bar for Israel to take action. But the problem here is if Israel goes after Iran, that it will invite response from Hezbollah in the north.
In a Monday evening speech to Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu saying he's appointed a special minister in charge of securing the release of hostages and called for an immediate emergency unity government. Netanyahu also warning Hamas that Israel's response to their attacks has only just begun. An Israeli military spokesman says the IDF is evacuating civilians from all southern border towns and a total siege of Gaza has been implemented. The defense minister announcing it will be cut off from food, fuel, and electricity for the foreseeable future. Jenna?
All right, Caitlin, thank you. And here in the United States, the White House says America stands firmly behind Israel in its struggle against Hamas, sending a naval strike group and supplies to the Mediterranean. But the Biden administration is also being blasted for freeing billions of dollars in Iranian assets. And some are questioning